afternoon. At the tone, Pacific Daylight Time will be 5, 4, and 30 seconds.
What? Oh my God, we're having an earthquake. Wait a minute. Hold on. Can you feel that? Yes, I sure can. Okay, this is interesting. There go the lights. Oh.
I'm Melanee Barash, and I've lived in Santa Cruz. I first moved up here in '77 and then went back to LA, where I'm originally from, for a couple of years for graduate school. And then I moved back up in '82, and I've been here ever since.
Cool.
So not exactly a native, but I've seen a lot of changes here. And yes, I was here for the earthquake. It was a very hot day, and now looking back on it, we call it earthquake weather. So every time it's sort of almost unseasonably warm, there's a little part of me that gets kind of fluttery and goes, huh. But we were completely oblivious to that. We happened to finish, my wife and I happened to finish our work early that day, like around 4 or so, and we decided we had a little bit of time before we had to pick up our son, who was 5 at the time, from his after-school program. And like I said, it was hot, so we went down to the beach, and we were boogie boarding and having a great time and cooling ourselves off, and then we came home and we were, of course, wet and sandy, and so hopped in the shower. And then all of a sudden this weird noise started happening, and it was like, what's that sound? And we heard the noise almost before we felt the shaking. Now, I've always lived in California, born in California, had gone through earthquakes in LA. I was a bit blasé about them, basically. So I'm like, oh, I guess it's an earthquake. But Marty went out to see what was going on, and was saying, Mel, you've got to get out of the shower, get out. I'm like, my hair has soap in it, and I am just covered in soap, and it's in my eyes, and not until I rinse off. She's like, you have to get out. Like, soap? But meanwhile, the water was stopping because water went off everywhere. So I managed to just squeak out the soap, came out kind of with an attitude of what is all this fuss about? When I walked into our living room and books had flown out from the bookcase. They were everywhere. Things had fallen off of other shelves. Fortunately for us, not a whole lot had fallen or broken. Our kitchen, for some reason, our cabinets held, and so things didn't fly out from the cabinets in the kitchen, but the floor was covered in books. And when we looked outside, we saw that the fireplace, the chimney, had fallen. But that was more shocking than dangerous for us. But then we had to assess, of course, what else is going on. And meanwhile, everything starts going through your mind, and at the same time my mind is completely freezing, trying to take it in and not really understanding. We had a dog and a cat at that time, and it was like, where are they? We couldn't find our cat for days and days. We just called for her, and finally, a few days later, she came out from this area in the backyard that was really overgrown, and I don't know if she'd been staying there the whole time or what was happening, but she just kind of walked out and was like, meow. So that was the good news. Also, right after, we were like, we have to get our son. Is he okay? So then Marty ran to get him at his after-school care, and I'm trying to get things together in the house. And she meets up on the way with his other mom, And so they both go to the after school and find out that he's fine, and all the kids are fine, and the building there was okay. So they came back to our house, and then a few other friends also just came to our house. In those days, our house was kind of a gathering place. And I had the tendency to overshop. Like if one bag of something is good, two must be better. It was kind of the Costco mentality. The more, the larger, the better. And so even though we didn't have power, so we couldn't cook anything because we had a gas stove. But, right, our neighbor, who was a plumber, was very dear. He came to all of us and said, I'll shut off the gas for all of you. So he went down the street shutting off gas for us. Like I said, the water was already out. Our electricity was out. So, but we had food. We had a lot of food, even stuff that didn't have to be cooked. So we became the gathering place where people came to eat and recover, basically. We tried to call our friends and family because we knew that they were going to be worried. But you couldn't get through on the phones. And I finally called some friends back east. I reached them, or they reached us, I can't remember. But we said, we're fine. Can you call our family for us? So they did. So it was kind of this funny thing that East Coast people were contacting our family in Los Angeles for us. And this was a rental house for us, so we're trying to get in touch with our landlord who lived in Oakland. So now we had a radio, a transistor radio, and running on batteries. So we were starting to hear what was going on in the rest of the Bay Area, and more news about Santa Cruz. And it was this scene of like feeling shut off from everybody, and yet knowing that everybody's going through this, like all the way up through the Bay Area, and not knowing how friends were or what had happened to them. So it was very frightening. And on top of all of that were the aftershocks that scared the bejeebers out of us, you know. And those too, it would sound like a train was coming. There would be this rattling, and that was the noise. And then the shaking, and it was like, is this going to be another big tremor, or is this small? But even the small ones, what did the big one do? Would the small ones loosen something that hadn't been totally broken before? So that was really frightening, and that went on for days, from what I remember. And what's funny is, I know that they say it was just 15 seconds, and probably everybody that you interview will say this, but it felt like it just was never ending. Because things just slow down in anything, any kind of crisis. Yeah. Just time goes so much more slowly. So that was the actual quake and my experience of it. I feel really fortunate that we were fine, that none of us were hurt, that our house was still standing and quite inhabitable, that nothing precious was broken, and partially that we had a landlord that was going to deal with, what had happened. Mm-hmm. Then there came the aftermath for me, because I was, in those days, I was a therapist, a counselor. And I worked on the Pacific Garden Mall. I had my own office there. And of course, the mall was unapproachable and in shatters. And I couldn't get to my office. And I couldn't get to my office. In my memory, I asked Marty, and she was like, oh, it was just a couple of days. And it's like, no. It had to be way longer than that, because I remember going to downtown meetings that were held at the city council and talking about what are they going to do, how are they going to give us access downtown? Will they give us access to our offices? They were figuring out a plan for all that. And so it felt like it was weeks, but my guess is it was probably about a week until I was able to actually get into my office. And I needed access partially because all of my files, all of my information that I needed was there. I had some money, some of the payments, but mostly it was just like, it was that not knowing. I mean, it's so different looking back. But at that point, it was like, maybe I'll never be able to access that stuff. If I can't ever access that stuff, if they're just going to tear down everything and demolish it, then how am I don't have my case notes. I don't have my accounting books. I don't know who owes me what. I can't bill insurance. I can't, all that stuff. It's like, I can't get to my business. Nothing was on computers. So I managed to find another place to rent, but I still didn't have my tools. And then they told us that on such and such a date, we would have access to our buildings for like a certain amount of time. I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 hours. And we could have 3 people total, so us and 2 other people, help us get in, get what we needed, get out. And so I started asking friends, but it was during the week and like during a weekday and during work time, and so a lot of people weren't available. So I ended up having a friend, and it's funny, in things like this, you never know who's going to help you. It's like some crisis happens, and people that you would never expect to come and help do, and people that you would think would, they're not able to. And I've had this happen several times in my life, and it always is interesting to me. But in any case, a friend of mine who actually had a pretty bad back and couldn't carry anything said, I'm really happy to help you, but I can't help you carry anything out. And I said, that's okay. If you can kind of keep your wits about you, then you can help organize everything. So that's what she did, and she was magnificent. I mean, there were some strapping guys that helped carry some of the furniture out, which was great, but she was like, wait, I'll go find someone, and it looks like you should take that out first, and let me get some more information about how this is going to work, or where you can bring your car up to, or, I think that was the most valuable thing of all, was to have her do that for us. Because I wasn't thinking very straight. I was just like, a deer in headlights again, still traumatized. So I was able to get most of my stuff that I definitely needed. And the building got red tagged, but they were able to do what they needed to do, and I could have gone back into it, but I didn't want to go back into it. So I eventually found another place. In some ways, not as great as the one that I had, but it was a fine place, and I stayed there for many years. But I think I've gotten fairly casual about earthquakes again, because there's been a few since then. But so I think what I mean by casual is that I don't necessarily run to a doorway or grab the emergency bag, which, by the way, no, I don't have. That's part of my casualness too. But my internal response is different than it used to be. It's a more deep-seated kind of fear than I had before. And we're in the same house now. So we moved, we bought a house, and then after a few years, we saw that our other house that we'd been renting was up for sale. And so we bought it. So we're there again, which is an interesting thing too, because it did great. I mean, it's a house that was built in the 40s, and it just kind of went like this. The quake, there were cracks, but like I said, it was just a chimney. So I feel pretty safe in it. But there is this, kind of like this shadow that's sort of, it's a trauma. It was a trauma, and that's there. And so one of the questions that I see on this was, in how did I feel like it affected my community? And did it affect my community? Mm-hmm. It very strongly affected my community, I feel. Mm-hmm. Being there in the meetings of folks that lived and worked downtown.
The City Hall meetings?
Yes. I got to see the impact. I got to see people's reactions to what was going on and their sense of powerlessness, all of our sense of powerlessness, and uncertainty about what the future would hold. And again, it's like, will there be another one? Will it be even bigger? Will we ever get access? What's going to happen to our mall? And when the tents went up, it was an amazing solution, and the community really came out to support the businesses that were working out of the tents. Mm-hmm. But there was also, at least for me, this feeling of intense sorrow, looking at what was lost. And no matter how it was going to be built back up, it was not going to be the same, because we'd gone through this. And you had to know that some businesses were not going to choose to open again. And it played out, as we've seen, that things didn't get constructed again, some of them for a very long time. And that the buildings that came back, or the vendors that came back, they're different. Mm-hmm. The vibe of downtown is different. It probably would have changed anyway. Santa Cruz has changed over the last 30 or some odd years that I've lived here. But the earthquake marks a very definite change. So I felt it in the way people rallied. You couldn't connect with anybody, strangers, without hearing people's earthquake stories. And that went on for a long, long time. Mm-hmm. Everybody was like, where were you during the earthquake? And everybody had their story. And if they weren't personally affected, they told someone else's story. So that was a sign, that was clear evidence to me that we were all, it had affected all of us. And that was in Santa Cruz, but that was also reverberating out through the whole Bay Area. Mm-hmm. And then finding out that people had died. And thinking things like the coffee roasting company where people had died. My previous partner used to work there. And so there was a lot of that, like, what if this would have happened yesterday, a few days ago? I could have been on this road at the time. I could have been crossing this bridge. In that sense, I remember thinking that sense of denial that we all have to live with, that feeling of like, of course I can drive 17, and of course everything's going to be okay. Of course I can make plans for tomorrow, and those plans will happen. And I can think about the end of the week and expect that to happen. That's just all sort of folly. That's just denial. Because any second, you don't know what's going to happen. We could be making this tape, and all of a sudden this whole room could start shaking. And in a way that's just, it's mind-blowing.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of unfathomable. And I think if you don't experience that sudden and total change in your life, you just don't get it. But, and of course, you have to go back functioning like, of course, things are going to just go as you expect them to go, knowing that life is never as you expect. But you can say that, life is never as, but it's weird to have lived it.
Yeah. Does it make you appreciate life a little bit more? Yes and no. I mean, how do I answer that? It makes me see how uncertain life is, and kind of, in some ways, fragile. And yet, being with my community of friends, and my community of Santa Cruzans, also how strong. How we rallied, how people got into action, how things, I mean, I think one of my favorite things that happened was when Bookshop was ready to open again in its new location, that the community passed books from the tent into the building. I mean, that's phenomenal. Mm. And that was the kind of support. It really felt like we love this town, and we will do what we need to do to bring it back again. So I appreciate that. I appreciate the strength and the fragility of life. Yeah. You said that you were a counselor
Mm-hmm.
at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Did you help any of your clients
Mm-hmm.
with earthquake trauma or PTSD?
Yes. Yeah, and there were some people that experienced that for many years after the earthquake. Triggers would be like anything sounds that they heard just prior to earthquake.
Wow.
Smells. I mean, we all store memories in different ways and have different triggers. And so for some folks, it was just having to say what happened over and over and over again. For some folks, it was dealing with those triggers and the fear that it would set off the PTSD that would happen. And for me, you know, there was healing in hearing other people's stories, and it was also re-triggering. So I had to find a way for me to be able to be present with people and not go back to what I had gone through or freak out myself, and just be with what they were experiencing, which was interesting, challenging, healing, because I got to, I think, through watching other people heal and hearing other people's stories, I got to heal myself also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. You said that you currently don't have any, precautions against natural disaster.
No, and with the fires and with earthquake, I mean, we did for a little while. We had water, so at least we had water, and we used to camp a lot, and so what we had was accessible in our garage: bottles of water, big jugs of water, and a camp stove, and sleeping bags, and that kind of stuff, tents that we could just grab. It was all in one location. And then we weren't camping very much anymore, and so we gave our camp stove to a friend, and the sleeping bags got kind of moth-eaten, and every time I would buy water, it would get green and moldy because we wouldn't use it, until I finally was like, this is ridiculous. So now we don't have anything.
Yeah.
And and it's on my list, but it's not been on my list for a long time. And it's one of those things that's like, if I don't do this and something happens, I am going to kick myself. And I think about, well, I'll just buy, this is the craziness around it. And maybe it's part of my reaction to having gone through it. I don't know. But I get caught up in stupid little things like, well, do I want a duffel bag? Or do I want a backpack? And what would be best to do? And do we want, how much water? And do I really want those packets of water? And what kind of food? I mean, that stuff is nasty. And then am I going to keep checking it to make sure that it's okay? Or is it just going to be in there and like get disgusting and I'll never want to use it again? And then do I want a blanket? Don't I want a blanket? And I went online and I started pricing ready-made ones, and they're anywhere from like $25 to like $600 or more. And I'm like, what do I really need? And what's going to be helpful? And then where am I going to keep it? Because if I keep it in the garage, for all I know, the garage is going to collapse. And so, yeah, I have this great emergency bag that I can't get to. Or I can have it in the house. But I'm going to be so caught up in getting my dog and my wife and what else, I don't know what else, that am I even going to think about grabbing my emergency bag? But I'm not going to keep it by the front door for like the next 30 years. So you know, my mind just spins off on these tangents that are absolutely ridiculous and yet keep me stagnant. So I'm trying to figure out, like, really what do I need and really what's the best way to do this? And then, you know, like, how do we contact each other? And at least we have cell phones now because we didn't then. Yeah, so no, I'm not prepared, and I keep trying to be, and I keep, you know, stalling out on it.
I think you just summarized every problem that everyone has with emergency preparedness.
Yeah?
I think you are not alone in those concerns and things like that. So.
But it's probably better to have something that I can't access, but maybe can, than nothing at all. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I want to get is one of those fireproof or fire-safe kinds of boxes in case of fire that has all of our important papers and things, because those are just going to be gone. And what a nightmare, what a bureaucratic nightmare to try and get those back. And, you know, that does not take much. But again, what size, what shape, where are we going to put it? Will it really be fireproof?
What is it like to reflect on your experience 30 years later?
I have distance. I have a lot more distance. And I was talking to my wife this morning, just trying to get some of the details. And we saw how much we'd forgotten. It was like, so was our son, I said he was 5, so he must have been in kindergarten. So where were we picking him up from? And he's like, well, no, it was from his preschool. You know, that kind of thing. It's like, well, did he go there for after school? He must have gone there for after school care because, you know, so I see the distance in my memory and the distance in my everyday going about my business, the distance in when there's some shaking or rattling. I'm not rushing for an emergency bag or hiding under something or other. Mm-hmm. But I also see the remnants, the vestiges of having gone through it, because I may not be rushing, but I do get under a door frame or go somewhere that will be safe. I am thinking about, I really, really need an emergency bag. The fires, any kind of emergency brings up that, like, anxiety, but it's not like right in the pit of my stomach or so. It's more like this sort of that kind of a, oh, there's some tension. There's like this drive that I need to do something, that something could happen. Yeah.
I feel, looking back on it, a sense of sadness and loss, too. Maybe in some ways a loss of innocence and denial, but also just a loss of what was, the funkiness, the places that I used to love to go downtown particularly and hang out. My friends and I used to love to just, what do you want to do today? Let's go bop the mall, you know, and go to our favorite breakfast places and then go see a movie and go to our favorite like Cat and Canary vintage clothing store and all that kind of stuff. And it's not there anymore. Yeah. And that kind of comes just with age and change anyway, but yeah.
A lot of people that I've interviewed so far, both in front of camera and not, really feel a sense of loss when they talk about the Cooper House.
Yes.
Do you have any fond memories of the Cooper House, or does it sort of ring true for you as well that it was a great loss to the community?
Yes, it was really, for me, I didn't usually sit there and listen to jazz like so many people did, but everybody knew the band Warmth and knew that they played there, and in fact, one of the musicians ended up coming into the Capitola branch, so I have that interesting connection to him. But it was a place I always brought visitors. So it was just this unusual, wonderful place where people would gather, listen to this great music, have a nice drink, and there were stores in there, and some of the stores I really liked going into. There was a candy store that I used to really like too. But so I missed that, but it was the heart. It was the heart of downtown. Yeah. That and bookshop. There were a few stores that for me were really like, this is why I go downtown. But knowing that the Cooper House wasn't going to come back was hard. That was like, Santa Cruz won't be the same.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you would like to add that we didn't cover? Any words for the future? Any small anecdotes that you remember?
I think what I say, not what I do. Be prepared as best as you can, including having a plan of how you can reach loved ones, so that you can signal that you're okay, or people that you know you need to get back together with, children and parents and spouses and people that you are going to want to know where they are. Watch out for bridges.
Word of advice.
Not helpful, but something about believe in the strength. Believe in the strength of ourselves and in the community. Be part of the community. I'm someone that mostly is a homebody, but I've learned from experience that in times of need or distress, you have to reach out for yourself and for other people and find ways to do that. It's healing. It's part of surviving. And it's part of rebuilding. And I guess, I don't know, in a philosophical way, just we don't know what the next moment will be. And so if we can kind of, if it's possible to live in the moment, if it's possible to enjoy what we're doing,
and savor the things that we do enjoy and love and make time for them. That's another way of preparing. It's another way of saying, okay, it's gone, but I loved it when it was here. I guess that's it.
That's lovely.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, if that's all that comes to mind, then I think we're done.
Okay.
I think that was it.
Thank you so much for giving
Thank you.
us the opportunity.
That was
to
great.
do